Greetings and welcome to the November 29th edition of Self-Awareness Without Judgment with Traci Trimble, PhD. Hi, I'm Traci. I am a doctor of energy medicine, and what that means is that I work inside of the human bioenergetic field, in the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual. I deal specifically with healing trauma, especially trauma that presents itself as anxiety and depression. I am a teacher as well as an energy worker. And today, in this 20 to 30 minute episode of Self-Awareness Without Judgment, we're going to be talking about developing our spiritual character. Not only about what that means, about why it's so important, but also with how do you do that so that you are always in the process of learning, sharing, healing, and growing. This week is also a little bit of a precursor to moving into next Friday's session, which talks about spiritual bypassing. We'll deal with that a lot more next week, but I also am going to touch on it this week. So, welcome. What is spiritual character? What I believe spiritual character is all about is knowing who you are at such a deep level that not only do you accept yourself through all of your strengths and weaknesses, but you are always also constantly growing. You are learning more and accepting more about yourself. I believe that spiritual character are the deepest roots of our self-love. It's the foundation that we exist on in being self-aware without judgment, in literally loving ourselves so deeply that we're no longer ashamed or disappointed and we stop betraying ourselves. So what does that mean? Shame, disappointment, and betrayal. Well, for starters, shame is a solar chakra. It's a very low vibration. And it is the belief that we should, we must, or we have to be, do, or have something. But deep in the fiber of our being, we pray that it isn't so. So I should, I must, I have to, but please don't make me. And very often in our character, we do that. We be who we think other people need us to be. We do things that please others at our own expense. Or we have things that make us feel fulfilled, if even for a moment, because it seems to be the right thing to do or what everyone else is doing. So when we start to develop our spiritual character, we get really clear on what those shame pieces are for our own selves. For example, for me, a big part of shame was in the idea of responsibility. I wanted to appear responsible. I wanted to be in a leadership role, but being responsible is very stressful for me. I would in the past take on way more than I could handle because it's who I wanted to be perceived as, someone who could handle everything. And the truth is, I am someone who can handle anything that's thrown at me. But sometimes handling it means not taking the responsibility for that. On the opposite side of responsibility, what would happen with me in the past in the energy of shame is that when I took on a responsibility that was either none of my business or I wasn't capable in the moment, when it didn't work out, I would blame others. It would never be my fault that I took on that responsibility. I just had too much responsibility. So as a part of my spiritual character, what I've realized, what I've come to terms with, and what I've accepted is that I don't want the responsibility. I don't have to should or must take that on. I'm happy now to delegate, assign, or release that responsibility. So that was shame. Let's talk about disappointment. When we develop our spiritual character, we're able to look at what disappoints us from a point of view of learning about ourselves, but also about learning of our influential others and learning of our habits and beliefs. Very often, disappointment is created because we expect of others what we're not willing to do ourselves, or we don't even know what our capabilities are. So let's go back to responsibility. When I'm disappointed because I can't take on a responsibility, it came from the belief that I had to have 7, 8, 10, 15 things on my plate and doing them all well, even if they were not in my wheelhouse, because I wanted to be in a role of leadership or responsibility. But in knowing that responsibility is not my core value or a strong trait, I've eliminated much of the disappointment in my life. Now let's talk about betrayal. Betrayal is the belief that we are going to be left behind, that our expectations are not going to be met. The challenge with betrayal, and most importantly in the format or the idea of spiritual character, betrayal has 3 tentacles that literally grab a hold of us and control or compel us. The first is we will attract to us others who will betray us, and not necessarily through any fault of their own other than not understanding their core character either. Or, secondly, we attract people to us who will allow us to betray them. Again, not necessarily with any very specific intention, but expectations controlling and compelling us. But here's the third, most important one, especially when we're talking about self-awareness without judgment. It's really important to recognize where, in your own experience, you betray yourself. You set expectations that cannot be met because they're not in your wheelhouse. They're not your core values. Or worse, we actually make choices that self-sabotage. That too is the energy of betrayal. When I'm very consciously aware of how much responsibility that I have on my plate, and it is the maximum amount that I'm interested or even capable in, then I must be consciously aware of new responsibilities taking on. For me, the awareness is very much one in, one out, or complete something before I add something else. That's a huge, huge part of self-betrayal, is recognizing when we've given up on our own dreams or we've put our own importance aside. This happens to be a spiritual disease called having to please others at our own expense, especially if we don't think that we do that. That very often leads to self-sabotaging, doing things at our own expense to make it look like we're doing, being, or having better. So when we talk about character, let's also look at where we create shame, disappointment, and betrayal in our lives by clearly knowing who we do want to be, but also knowing who we don't want to be. When we talk about spiritual character, there are 3 foundations or systems of interactive evaluation and awareness that's important to understand, especially at the beginning when we're trying to figure out not only who we are, but who do we want to be. So let's look at those in 3 different ways. The first foundational piece, the ground in which you stand on, is self. It's the parts of your core values or who you want to be that are entirely dependent on you. Sure, they could be influenced by outside others, but if we take them from the very specific point of view that this is all about me all of the time. There are 5 in this area. They are called physical well-being, emotional capacity, mental competency, spiritual connection, and overall character. So when we look at these self-created, self-maintained values, we start with our physical well-being. If we are not physically well, if we are not taking care of ourselves, then it's going to be a challenge to be who we say we're going to be. Physical well-being has many different forms, but first and foremost, we want to look at it as though, what do I do on a consistent basis to be reliable to my own physical well-being, specifically to our body? What am I going to commit to? So most commonly, it's things like drinking water, exercising or movement, choosing ways in which you respect your physical body, food, the quality of food that we eat. Physical is a very solid foundation for our core values because it's really hard to be who we say we want to be, especially in those positive, ever-growing aspects, when we're constantly in physical pain or disability. When we talk about emotional and mental, it's about being aware of what our capacities are, what keeps us at a higher vibration and what takes us to a lower vibration. But it's also about our spiritual connection, knowing that we're not alone in this game of life, having systems of support that allow us to create and maintain who we want to be. And then that becomes our character. So for example, if I was to share with you, who am I at my core base, at the value of who I want to be without judgment or criticism, I would share that with you. I create and maintain balance, most specifically for myself, but in my professional career, I also create and maintain that balance, or at least teach to create and maintain balance to others. So I am balance. But I am also passion and purposefulness and abundance. Those are core values that I use to guide me in my everyday life. Am I being that? Am I attracting that? Am I living in those energies most of the time? And when I am, it's very easy to be patient, peaceful, and productive. And those are core values for me, because when I am not in those places, I'm not in alignment with passionate, purposeful, and abundant. There's also kindness and compassion, truthfulness and authenticity, freedom and autonomy, service. So I take that checklist on an everyday, every single day basis, and I evaluate myself without judgment against them. Am I always those things? No. But am I always making an effort at the best of my ability in that moment to be in the awareness that that's who I want to be? Yes. Yes, I am. And in doing that, in having those core values available to guide, teach, heal, and protect me, I am being who I say I'm going to be. I'm creating and maintaining that. So my question to you as you develop your spiritual character is to ask that question at a level above just the human experience, at a level where we have the capacity to, from this present moment, look into the future, but also into the past, just enough to be stable in this moment and knowing who we want to be. Are you doing that? Here's where the challenge is created. When we add that second level or format of awareness that we work from. The second is our... Here's where the challenge begins. As we add our partners, our parents, our children, our friends, our family, our acquaintances, our co-workers, the world around us, it adds another dimension to our character. I can easily be all of my core values for myself, but the reality of being human is that we're not influenced by just what we're thinking and feeling. We're influenced by those influential outside others that I just mentioned. So it's a second layer of paying attention. Who do I have to be to successfully navigate what other people need, expect, and are perceiving? And finally, in that third foundational piece are our habits and beliefs. Our habits and beliefs deeply affect our spiritual character because very often they're created not from the level of self, the physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, but from the influential other. Knowing what our habits and beliefs are, how they affect us, on the upside, how they create our love energies, but on the downside, the lower vibration side, how they create our fear energies. And those foundation pieces include our career, our finances, our quality of life, our vision for the future. When we have the capacity to sit down and to evaluate our strengths and our weaknesses, from the space of who do I want to be, and from the perspective of those 12 areas, broken down into 3, self, influential others, and habits and beliefs, we have the capacity to start somewhere. To start in the space that we're checking in with ourselves on a regular basis. So my question to you is, who do you want to be? Who is it that you want to present yourself from the inside out? How do you want to receive from the outside in? When we get really super clear with our core values, what we're doing is teaching others how to treat us. We are creating boundaries that we are no longer willing to cross because we actually know what's in our highest good, and we act in our highest good. At the very base of all of this, you may ask, well, what is this all about? Why is it even important? Because it's a commitment that you're making to yourself to be your truest self, to operate from a place of alignment and from your highest good. So again, my question to you is, who do you want to be? Are you ready to begin to develop your spiritual character? Where do you begin? Well, take a good look at your strengths and at your weaknesses, and then combine them together to be a compelling story about who you are, how you present yourself, and at the core of your being, exactly the energy that you want to give and to receive. This was just a quick catch into spiritual character. Should you have any questions, as always, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Traci, Traci, at tracitrimble.ca. If you're willing to give your first name, last name, and date of birth, I'll actually energetically connect to you before I ask or answer the question, so that what you're receiving is exactly what it is that you need to know. I hope today was helpful, and I look forward to talking to you next week about bypassing, specifically spiritual bypassing. It's about being the things that you think you have to be spiritual. A great example of that is happy all the time. A great example of that is everything only goes right. Human being doesn't work like that. When we spiritually bypass, we tend to avoid, ignore, and escape. We fear our weaknesses, and we fear looking at who we really want to be. We fear becoming as big and as bright and as beautiful as we're meant to be, and we stay small. So I wish you a most amazing week, and I look forward to talking to you next week about spiritual bypassing. Thanks. Have a great weekend.